Chari here today, and I am going to be showing you how I made my Wizard of Oz themed slimline castle card. First, I'm going to start with a panel that I've cut with the largest slimline stitched rectangle die, and I'm going to be doing some inking on the background with my cloud stencil. I want to divide this card into thirds, so I'm just going to draw sort of a guideline here, about a third of the way up. This is going to be my ground, and this way I know that I can fill everything above that line with my clouds. I'm going to be using some kiddie pool ink and a blending brush, and I've just taped my cloud stencil to my panel here so that it doesn't move around. I'm tapping my ink off on a piece of typing paper before I take it to my cardstock. That way I have some of that ink gone and I don't have too heavy of an ink application. Once I have it looking the way I want, I'm going to take that stencil off. I'm going to turn it to a different side and shift it down. And then I'm going to do the same thing on each level. So basically, I'm taking that ink and pulling it up off the stencil onto the background, but I'm not completely saturating it, so it kind of goes from that kiddie pool color to a white before the next line of clouds start. So I've worked my way down to that pencil line that I drew, and I know that this pencil line is going to be covered up, so I'm just going to do one last layer of those clouds in the background. Then to add some texture, I'm adding some white metallic watercolor, just a few speckles in the sky. So they're not very obvious, but it just adds a little bit of magical shine to the sky. Now I'm going to work on the pieces that are going to be the yellow brick road and the ground around it. So I've taken that slimline die, I've cut a piece of sunflower cardstock, and I've placed my castle and my rainbow just for placement so that I can get this simple stitched hillside die exactly where I want it. Now I want the blue piece to be the exact same size as the yellow, so I'm just going to line them up and place that die right in the same place. Then I'll run that through my die cut machine and I'll have a blue and a yellow piece that are exactly the same size. I'm also going to take another white slimline rectangle and I'm going to cut the top of it with the puffy cloud border dies. And I'm going to be doing some inking on this, so it's actually going to be trees, not clouds. They're going to be purple. But I'm just cutting that so it's above my ground. Now I can mark where I want to cut this blue piece. So I put my castle there and I put the little door there so I could mark where the edges of the door are. And then along the bottom, I'm going to make two little marks 1/4 of an inch in from each side. That way I can connect these pencil lines and I can cut it with my paper trimmer and I can create a road that's larger in the foreground at the bottom and smaller in the background as it goes towards the castle. So I'll just use my paper trimmer and line up that pencil line with the guide wire there and just cut those pieces off. So the middle piece is just going to be a throwaway piece or a scrap piece, and then the side pieces are the pieces I'm going to use for the card. So now to make the yellow brick road, which was my very first idea when I saw this new brick stencil anyways, that this would make the perfect yellow brick road. And that is where this all sort of stemmed from. So I'm going to tape this piece to the back of that brick stencil. And then I'm going to do some ink blending through the stencil. I'm going to be using fossilized amber to do an all over stenciling. And you don't have to be too heavy-handed, you just want to get the idea of brick onto this piece of cardstock. And you don't have to worry about going all the way to the outside edges either, because those pieces are going to get covered up with the blue that I have there. And then to give it a little more variation in color, I went in with some wild honey distressing and just did a couple darker spots so that the bricks aren't too uniform and there's a little bit more variation in the color. And then I'm going to pull this off, and there is my yellow brick road. So you can see when you put those blue pieces on there, it's going to create the edges of the road going towards the castle. Now to work on these trees that are going to go behind the castle that I cut with that puffy cloud border, I'm going to add a heavy-handed layer of some picked raspberry. So I'm basically coloring this paper in that picked raspberry color. And then I'm going to do the top edges in seedless preserves. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to sort of mark where the hill's going to go so that I don't go too far down, because I still want to see some of that picked raspberry. I'm using regular distress ink and seedless preserves here, and I was seeing my lines, so I changed to a blending brush. But once I got it on there, it just seemed so dark because the colors were blending together. So then I tried some seedless preserves in the Distress Oxide, which has that pigment in it. And instead of the colors blending together so much, it's going to sit on top of that picked raspberry a little bit more. So I added that on top, and I'm just blending it out with that picked raspberry a little bit more. And then I've got some Stickles glitter gel here. Now, on my original card, I used regular Stickles, but I just thought I would play with this gel and see what it was like. Both of them have kind of the same look, but this is clear, and then it has some iridescent glitter in it, and it just adds some shine and some excitement to the tops of these trees. I started with my palette knife, but I ended up just rubbing it on with my finger, which is what I did with the Stickles on the original card. I'm going to set that aside to dry, and I'm going to start assembling some of my pieces here. So I went ahead and cut all the arches for the rainbow out of the various colors of cardstock. I have some chili pepper, fake tan, sunflower, cilantro, and blue Jay cardstock, and I'm just adding those to the base that die cuts. Then I went over the whole thing with a glitter pen and added some very subtle shimmer to my rainbow. So now to work on my castle, or in this case, the Emerald City. And I'm starting with some cilantro cardstock. I've cut that castle base, but I wanted to kind of pull the brightness out a little bit, give it some variation so it wasn't so solid. So I'm just going over parts of it with some peeled paint distress ink and darkening it up a little bit and giving it some variation in the color. The towers, however, are cut from some shimmer cardstock, and I believe this one is from the Tropical Pack. And then I cut all the tops out of some green glitter cardstock. So a lot of greens, a lot of textures happening on the Emerald City. So I've gone ahead and put those glitter tops on the towers, and I'm going to go ahead and add the glitter top to the top of the castle. And then I'm going to do my door in two different colors. So I've got a door cut from some rainforest cardstock, and what I'm doing is I'm folding the door where that score line is, and I'm going to cut the door off. So I'm going to have the frame left over with no doors, and then I'm going to fit that frame over that door that's cut out of that noble fir cardstock that you see sitting there. So I'm just being very careful to cut along that score line so it's nice and straight. And then I can add a little bit of liquid glue, and then I'm going to slide this over the doors on this noble fir piece. So I'm going ahead and I'm bending those doors so that those score lines are in the right place. I'm going to add a little bit of my glue, and I'm adding it to this piece versus adding it to the frame so that I don't get any glue on the doors as I'm sliding this over the doors. So you can see that fits perfectly over top of that, and now you've got a different colored frame from your doors. So it's just a little added extra effort to get a two-colored look to this. I'm going to go ahead and add those tiny little door handles. And I've cut those from some cilantro cardstock. Since this door is very dark, I wanted them to be that lighter green so they stood out a little better. And I'm just using my embellishment wand to pick those up and put them on those dots of glue so that I don't get it all messy with my fingers. So now I'm going to do the little piece that goes in the window. And I started out with my mustard seed and got it a little bit too dark, but this is why I started with a larger piece. So I want the window to kind of glow, but I still want it to have a green look to it because I wanted everything on the Emerald City piece to be green. So you can see I'm going to use that sort of top piece where I have lighter yellow, and then I'm going to pull in some twisted citron into that yellow. So it's going to be like a yellow to green gradient in this window. So I'm just going back and forth between the twisted citron and that mustard seed. And you can see you're only going to see a tiny little bit of this, but I like that yellow glow towards the bottom up towards the green at the top of the window. So I'll just cut off the extra that's going to stick up there, and then I'm just going to glue this to the back. So now I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue to the back of that decorative frame. This is cut from some rainforest cardstock so that it matches the frame that goes around the door that's going to go below it. So I'll just add that, line it up with that opening. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the door. And I'm just adding glue to the frame of the door so that the doors can actually open if you want them to. And then I'm also going to add this little piece that goes on the bottom of the window. Looks like a window box, and I've cut that from some peacock cardstock just for a different shade with that blue-green. Now I'm going in with the chisel tip of a Copic marker, and I'm just making tiny little bricks sort of scattered around. So this gives the look of some smaller bricks. So it's different than my yellow brick road because we don't want the scale of the bricks to be the same in this scene we're creating. And I actually used two different colors of Copic so there was some variety. Now I've put a strip of foam tape on the back of each of the towers, and I'm just going to add those to each side. So now you can start to see how the different shades of green are going to work together to give you lots of dimension in the colors. And for this castle, I did not use that rectangular piece that goes on the front. So I'm just going to use my foam tape and add it to the back of that last glitter piece. And I'm just going to eyeball it and line it up with the score lines that are on the back. And it's just going to bridge the gap between the two towers. This gives it the look of those towers being set out in front of the door and the door sort of being in a recessed area of the castle, which I just think is a different look. I'm also going to add a couple of the little window frames. These are also cut from some rainforest cardstock. And then I'll just add the insides just dropped right into those frames. And the inside pieces are going to be cut from some noble fir cardstock. So the little windows are going to match the colors and the look of the door. Now I'm going to assemble some of the landscaping pieces. So I'm using the little tree from the shadow box die as well as these little flowers that go with the shadow box add-on. I've cut the little flowers from two different pink and red shades of shimmer cardstock, and I'm just going to layer those on the back pieces that are cut from some storm cloud cardstock so you get a dark center to the flowers. And then the trees, the tops of the trees are cut from raspberry cardstock, and then I use ground espresso cardstock for the trunks. So I've got 3 trees and about 6 flowers that I'll add to this scene once we start putting it all together. So now I can start to assemble all these pieces onto my card base. So I have a slimline card base, which is 3.5 by 8.5, and I'm going to put that cloud panel that I made at the very beginning right onto that card base. Next, I'm going to add the pink tree background that I worked on. I'm using lots of adhesive because it's a little bit warped from the gel, but I'm making sure that it's going to get stuck down nice and flat to my background. Next, I can add the yellow brick road and the blue pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and add those blue pieces to my yellow brick road. Make sure I can get those nice and lined up perfectly, and you can see that this creates the edge of the road so that it looks like it's going off in the distance. And then I'll just add that over top of that inked piece, lining up the very bottom edge. So I've laid my castle here just for placement. I'm going to go ahead and glue down the rainbow. And I wanted the rainbow to look like it's going into the Emerald City. So it doesn't matter that that bottom isn't straight because it's going to be covered up by the castle. And I've already got my foam tape on my castle, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull those pieces off and add that to my card as well. And then I can just trim off that piece of the rainbow that falls off the edge of the card. So finally, to do the landscaping in the front, I've got those trees that I glued together earlier. And I'm just going to add 2 on one side of the road and 1 on the other. This particular one is kind of on that castle, so it sticks up, and then I just glued the trunk down to the ground. So I'm just holding it in place till that glue kind of dries enough. For the other ones, I'm going to add a foam square so that they stand up a little bit off that background and have a little bit of dimension as the scene comes towards you. And then finally, I'm just going to sprinkle around the little flowers that I created in that grass, that blue grass. I just love the colors of this card, and it was actually inspired by a cross stitch piece that I have done and that hangs on the wall in my craft room. And that's where I got the idea for these pinky purple trees and the blue ground, because I didn't want green grass with an Emerald City. I thought that would take away from the green castle. And then here is my finished card. Being a fan of The Wizard of Oz, I am very pleased with how this card turned out, and I hope that you try new ways to use your Build a Castle die than just a regular old castle. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!